The service writer at the dealership had a smudge of grease across his forehead and a way of looking past me, as if I were a temporary obstacle between him and his computer screen. I stood there with the manila folder in my hand, the one containing the vehicle title and the corrected registration forms we'd spent 3 weeks chasing. "I have an appointment for 10, I said. "The sedan." He tapped a few keys, his eyes never leaving the monitor. "I don't see a Judy Osborne on the schedule. It's for the 2018 Honda. I called it in on Tuesday." "Right here," he said, finally looking at me. "The appointment is under Daniel Estrada." "Mr. Estrada is coming in?" I felt that familiar sharp pinch of irritation. I had made the call. I had coordinated the time around my regional sales meetings and Daniel's bookkeeping deadlines. I had physically driven the car to the lot. But because Daniel's name was the only one on the original purchase agreement, the appointment had been logged to him. I didn't argue. I just handed him the vehicle title. I was used to absorbing the logistics of Daniel's existence, the quiet labor of making sure his life ran on time, while he remained the official point of contact for everything, from the HVAC contractor to the condo association. I sat in the waiting area, a room that smelled of stale coffee and industrial carpet cleaner. I pulled out my phone to check my email, but a notification from Brenda, my neighbor from the 3rd floor, was already waiting. Brenda treated the condo association's bylaws like holy scripture and neighborhood gossip like a professional sport. The message was short. "Judy, I saw this and felt just terrible for you. I had no idea things were that strained. Do you want me to come over?" Attached was a partial screenshot of a Facebook post. It was cropped tightly, showing only a few paragraphs of text and a profile picture of my daughter, Nancy. Nancy was 29 and worked as a unit coordinator at the hospital, a job that required the kind of high-pressure organization I prided myself on. I tapped the image to enlarge it. Nancy had written a long post about the suffocating weight of conditional love. She didn't name me directly, but she described a mother who viewed family support as a business transaction and used logistical precision to mask a lack of empathy. She claimed she had been promised help with a security deposit for a new apartment, only to have the offer retracted based on a performance review of her spending habits. My stomach tightened. There had been no performance review, only a clear agreement. I would help with the deposit once. Nancy provided a written budget and proof that she had paid back the $2,000 she owed me from last winter. She had ignored my texts for a week, and I had simply told her the offer was on hold. Nancy had taken a simple no and turned it into a character assassination. I dialed her number immediately. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice sounding strained, likely in the middle of a shift change at the hospital. "Why is Brenda sending me screenshots of your Facebook page?" I asked. There was a pause. "I was just venting, Mom. I didn't think anyone in Harrisburg would actually see it. It's a private group. Brenda is in that group. Now my neighbor thinks I'm a monster because you can't keep a ledger." "I'm sorry," Nancy said, her tone shifting into a practiced, soothing register. "I was stressed and I overreacted. I'll delete it right now. I didn't mean for it to cause a scene. Delete it now." "It's gone," she said. "Can we just move past this? I'm exhausted." I hung up and stared at the dealership's beige walls. The post was gone, but the gossip had already started to move. I felt a flicker of relief that the conflict had been settled with a simple apology. But as I looked at the vehicle title in my hand, I wondered why Nancy felt the need to frame the situation as a betrayal. I assumed she was just being dramatic, unaware that the narrative had been carefully shaped to hide a different conversation entirely. The service writer handed me the keys with a look of profound boredom, as if the act of returning my car was a personal favor. I walked out into the Harrisburg humidity, the kind of thick, clinging heat that makes the pavement smell like hot asphalt and old rain. I climbed into the sedan, the leather seats searing through my skirt, and sat there for a moment. I wanted to believe Nancy's apology was enough. I wanted to believe that deleting the post had erased the narrative. But my phone buzzed in the cup holder. It was a message from my sister-in-law, Martha. Martha lived 3 towns over and operated on a frequency of bluntness that usually bypassed social niceties entirely. "Judy, I saw that post before it went down. I didn't know you were being so hard on Nancy about the deposit. Family is all we've got, and a few $100 isn't worth the drama. Hope you two can work it out. I stared at the screen. Brenda's screenshot was just the start. The rest of the family had already seen it. The private group Nancy mentioned clearly wasn't private enough, or perhaps she had sent it to a few people directly. Either way, the version of me that existed in their minds was now a cold accountant who performed performance reviews on her own child. I drove home, my mind already mapping out the corrections. I didn't care about the hurt. I cared about how I looked to everyone else. I needed to send a group text or make a series of calls to clarify the terms of the agreement. The budget, the $2,000, the repayment schedule. I would present the facts as a ledger. And the logic would dismantle the smear. When I entered the condominium, the air conditioning was humming, and the hallway smelled faintly of the lemon wax Daniel used on the floors every Saturday. He was in the living room, leaning back in his armchair with a ledger open on his lap. His glasses perched on the tip of his nose. He looked peaceful, which felt like a provocation. Why is Martha texting me about Nancy's security deposit? I asked. I didn't put my bag down. I didn't take off my shoes. Daniel looked up, blinking. Martha? I don't know. What did she say? She saw the post. The one where Nancy told the world I'm a monster for not handing over cash without a budget. Did you know she posted that? Daniel shifted. In the chair, his gaze drifting toward the window. I knew she was upset. She called me yesterday. She said you were being rigid. Rigid? I'm being reasonable. I'm being the only person in this family who understands how a bank account works. I stepped closer, my voice rising. Did you tell her it was okay to vent publicly? Did you encourage her to frame me as the villain so she could feel better about her spending? I didn't encourage anything, Judy, he said, his voice remaining in that low, steady register that usually calmed me, but now felt like a wall. I just told her I'd try to talk to you. I told her we'd figure it out. You figured it out by letting her smear me to our extended family? I didn't see the post, Daniel said. I didn't know she actually put it on Facebook. I thought she was just complaining to a couple of friends. I felt a surge of anger that was disproportionate to the moment. I didn't stop to ask if he had actually seen the screenshot or if he had even checked his notifications. I just assumed that because he always played the role of the sympathetic listener, he had provided the emotional cover Nancy needed to launch the attack. You always do this, I said. You play the good cop so I can be the one who says no to the bills and the loans. You let her believe I'm the obstacle while you pretend to be the bridge. It's a coward's way of managing a daughter. Daniel closed the ledger slowly. He didn't argue. He didn't defend his role. He just looked at me with a tired expression. I'm sorry if I made her feel like she had a different set of rules to follow. I might have told her I'd handle the deposit if it became a real emergency. I didn't mean to undermine you. It was a partial apology. A soft, vague admission that didn't actually address the public humiliation or the fact that he had made a side promise behind my back. But it was a concession. It was a piece of data I could use to close the file. You can't make promises about money that isn't yours to give, Daniel, I said, finally setting my bag on the entry table. And you certainly can't handle it by letting her lie about me to the family. I'll call her, he said. I'll tell her she needs to send a message to Martha and whoever else saw it. I'll make sure she clears your name. I exhaled the tension, leaving my shoulders. The project was back under control. If Daniel took the lead on the reconciliation, it would look less like I was defending myself, and more like the family was correcting a misunderstanding. I went into the kitchen to start dinner, feeling a sense of temporary calm. I had confronted the problem, received an apology, and delegated the cleanup. Later that evening, as I watched Daniel on the phone with Nancy in the other room, I remembered the way he had hesitated when I first walked in. He hadn't been surprised that Nancy was upset. He had been surprised that I knew. The next 3 weeks were a study in surface-level stability. I returned to my usual rhythms. The Monday morning sales reports, the Tuesday night condo association emails regarding the guest parking permits, and the Saturday morning ritual of scrubbing the bathroom tiles. Daniel and I stopped talking about the Facebook post. He had called Nancy, she had supposedly apologized, and the family group text had returned to its standard rotation of birthday reminders and photos of grandchildren. I told myself the project was closed. I had applied the necessary pressure, the apology had been logged, and the behavior had been corrected. I didn't notice that Daniel had stopped mentioning Nancy's phone calls entirely, or that he seemed more preoccupied with his bookkeeping than usual, spending long hours in the den with the door shut. I assumed he was just catching up on the quarter end. The calm broke on a Sunday afternoon at Martha's house. Martha lived in one of those narrow 3-story row homes that felt like they were leaning on each other for support. The air inside was thick with the scent of slow-cooked pot roast and the kind of heavy floral perfume Martha had worn since the 80s. It was a celebratory dinner for her brother's retirement, and half the extended family had squeezed into a dining room that was clearly designed for 4 people, not 12. Nancy arrived late, wearing a new dress that looked expensive and carrying a bottle of wine. She hugged me with a brief, polite stiffness that felt like a social obligation. We spent the first hour of the dinner navigating the minefield of community politeness. My cousins and aunts spoke to me in a tone that was slightly too soft, as if I were recovering from a sudden illness. They asked about my work and the condo, but they avoided any topic that might lead to a conversation about Nancy's living situation. I could feel the tension humming under the table. Every time there was a lull in the conversation, someone would quickly pivot to the weather or the quality of the roast. It was a choreographed dance of avoidance, and it made my skin itch. I wanted to bring it up, to state clearly that the issues had been resolved and the budget requirements were still in place, but I didn't want to be the one to ruin the retirement celebration. The collision happened during dessert. We were all crowded around the table, passing around a platter of lemon squares. "So, Nancy," my cousin Leo said, leaning back in his chair, "did you finally find a place? I remember you saying you were looking in the city." Nancy smiled, a small, triumphant expression. "I actually signed the lease on a great little studio last week. It's a bit further out, but the light is amazing." I paused, my fork halfway to my mouth. "Signed the lease? I didn't know you'd found a place. Did you get the budget together?" The table went quiet. I could see Martha glancing at Daniel, who suddenly became very interested in his lemon square. "It worked out, Mom," Nancy said, her voice airy. "Dad helped me get the deposit sorted. He said it was an emergency since the place was such a steal, so he just handled it. It was a huge relief not to have to worry about the paperwork. The paperwork was my budget. The handling it was the side promise Daniel had admitted to in a vague apology weeks prior. He hadn't just tried to talk to me. He had bypassed me entirely and funded the deposit. I felt a hot flash of anger that started in my chest and moved up my neck. I looked at Daniel, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. He was staring at the floral wallpaper of Martha's dining room, his shoulders hunched. "You gave her the money?" I asked, my voice low. "It was a small amount, Judy," Daniel murmured. "I didn't want her to lose the apartment." "It wasn't about the amount, Daniel. It was about the agreement." I looked around the table. The polite masks were slipping. I saw the look on Martha's face, a mixture of pity and judgment. In that moment, I didn't see Daniel as the primary actor. I saw Martha as the coordinator. I assumed that because Martha had been the one texting me about the drama. Weeks ago, she had been the one encouraging Daniel to go behind my back. I assumed she had whispered in his ear, telling him that my boundaries were too rigid and that he needed to save Nancy from me. "I suppose you told him to do it, Martha," I said, turning to my sister-in-law. "You've been playing the concerned relative for weeks, but you were just waiting for the right moment to make sure I looked like the villain while you played the hero." Martha blinked, her expression shifting from pity to genuine confusion. "What are you talking about, Judy? I haven't spoken to Daniel about money in 3 years. I just told you I saw the post because I thought you should know." "Don't lie," I snapped. "You're the one who started the conversation. You're the one who thinks a few $100 is more important than a mother and daughter having a functional agreement. You've been fueling this." "Judy, stop it," Daniel said, finally looking up. Martha had nothing to do with this, but I was already on a roll, the frustration of the last month pouring out of me. I accused Martha of manipulating the family narrative, of treating my home like a project for her own amusement. I spoke for 2 minutes, a precise cutting dissection of her interference, while the rest of the family sat in a stunned, heavy silence. When I finally stopped, Martha didn't yell back. She just looked at me with a tired, distant expression and slowly set her lemon square back on the plate. "I don't know why you're so angry with me," she said quietly. "I just liked the roast." The room felt suddenly cold. I looked at Daniel, who was now looking at me with a flicker of something that looked like genuine disappointment. I realized that I had just attacked a woman who had done nothing more than report a fire that someone else had started. I had tried to find a target for my anger, and I had picked the easiest one available instead of the one who had actually broken the trust. I sat back in my chair, the taste of lemon and grease bitter in my mouth. Nancy was smiling softly, her victory complete. She had the apartment, she had the money, and she had successfully shifted the focus of the afternoon from her own deception to my outburst. The apology from 3 weeks ago hadn't changed anything. It had just been a way to quiet me down until the money could be moved. As I looked at my husband and daughter, I knew the temporary calm hadn't been a reconciliation at all. It had been a waiting period. The drive back to the condominium was a study in forced silence. Daniel kept both hands on the wheel at 10 and 2, his eyes fixed on the road, avoiding the rearview mirror as if I might suddenly vanish from the passenger seat. I watched the familiar Harrisburg streetlights flicker across the dashboard, my mind replaying the look on Martha's face. I had spent 20 minutes dismantling her character in front of the entire family, and for what? Because I was too lazy to look at the person sitting 6 inches away from me. I admit that being angry did not make my first accusation accurate. I had seen a pattern of behavior in Daniel. The quiet side deals, the strategic omissions. And I had projected that pattern onto Martha because she was the one who had brought the evidence to my door. It was a tactical error. I had traded my moral high ground for a momentary release of pressure, and in doing so, I had given Nancy exactly what she wanted, a distraction. When we pulled into the parking garage, Daniel didn't turn off the engine immediately. He just sat there, the car idling, the humid air beginning to seep through the vents. "I can't believe you did that to Martha," he said. His voice wasn't angry. It was disappointed, which was worse. She was just trying to be a friend. "I know," I said. The admission felt like a lead weight in my stomach. "I was wrong about her, but that doesn't change the fact that you lied to me for 3 weeks. "I didn't lie. I just didn't elaborate." "That's what a bookkeeper calls a lie, Daniel." We walked up to the 3rd floor in silence. As soon as the door clicked shut behind us, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Nancy. "I hope you're happy. You completely ruined the dinner for everyone. I can't believe you attacked Aunt Martha over a security deposit." I didn't reply. I walked into the living room and stood in the center of the rug, waiting for Daniel to stop pretending he was looking for something in the kitchen. "Sit down," I said. He sighed and sank into his armchair, the same one where he'd been reading his ledger the day I first found the screenshot. He looked smaller than usual, his shoulders curved inward. "I'm sorry it blew up like that," he said. "I really am. I just wanted Nancy to have a place to live. I thought if I just handled it, we could avoid the fighting." "Stop," I said, cutting him off. "No more I just wanted to help apologies. That's the same script you used 3 weeks ago. You told me you'd handle it then, and what that actually meant was that you would fund her life while she told the family I was a monster for asking for a budget." Daniel looked away, his gaze landing on a stack of mail on the side table. She was stressed. Judy. She didn't mean the things she wrote in that post. She meant them enough to leave them up long enough for the whole neighborhood to see. She meant them enough to use them as leverage to get the money from you. I stepped closer, my voice remaining level but hard. "You didn't just give her a deposit. You gave her permission to smear me. You let her frame my boundaries as cruelty so that you could feel like the savior." "It wasn't like that," he murmured. "Then how was it?" "Because from where I'm standing, you and Nancy had a deal. You provide the cash, and in exchange, you both get to pretend I'm the problem." Daniel finally looked at me. He didn't look triumphant or even particularly guilty. He just looked tired of the conversation. "Fine. Daniel and Nancy admitted they had agreed to frame my requirements as cruelty so that the money could move without a fight. The sentence hung in the air, stripped of the usual qualifiers. It was the first honest thing he had said in a month. He had acknowledged the coordination, the way they had aligned their stories to bypass me. He had allowed a public narrative of my rigidity to be the currency that bought Nancy's apartment. I didn't think it would actually hurt you, he added. I thought you'd just be annoyed for a few days, and then we'd move on. You don't get to decide how much I'm hurt by a public indictment of my character, I said. And you don't get to use my rigidity as a tool to manage your daughter. I felt the urge to keep pushing, to list every single time he had played the good cop over the last decade. But I stopped. I knew where this went. If I turned this into a historical audit of our marriage, he would shut down, and we would end up in another 3-week cycle of surface-level peace. I needed a result, not a confession. Here's how this works now, I said. I am not going to send a public apology to Martha, but I will call her tomorrow and tell her I was out of line. That is my responsibility. Daniel nodded slowly. But as for you and Nancy, I continued, the bank is closed. There will be no more emergency funds. No more handling it behind the scenes. If Nancy needs a dime from this household, whether it's for rent, a car repair, or a new dress, it goes through a joint request. Both of us have to sign off on it in writing, and it will be contingent on the original agreement. A written budget and the repayment of the $2,000 she owes me. Judy, that's not realistic, Daniel said. She'll just stop talking to us. Then she can stop talking to us, I replied. I would rather have a daughter who doesn't speak to me than a daughter who uses me as a villain to get a check. I walked to the hallway closet and pulled out the folder with the vehicle title from a few weeks ago. I set it on the table between us. I spent 3 weeks fixing the registration on that car because your name was the only one that mattered to the dealership. I said, I'm done absorbing the logistics of a life where I'm the only one following the rules. From now on, if you want to be the bridge, you can start by paying her back the money you gave her from our shared savings. I want that balance restored by the 1st of next month. Daniel stared at the folder. He didn't argue, but he didn't agree either. He just sat there in the quiet of the living room, the air conditioning clicking off, leaving us in the sudden, heavy silence of the Harrisburg evening. I didn't wait for him to find the right words. I went into the bedroom and closed the door, leaving him alone with the ledger of what he had actually cost us. I called Martha on Monday morning before my first sales call. I didn't lead with a long explanation or a list of reasons why I'd been stressed. I just told her I was out of line at dinner, and that I was sorry for attacking her. Martha didn't make me grovel. She just said she'd already forgotten about it and asked if I'd found a good brand of laundry detergent for the new high-efficiency machines. We spent 5 minutes talking about soap, and then I hung up. The social ledger was balanced, even if the air between us still felt a little thin. For the next 4 months, the household operated on the new protocol. I didn't call it a protocol to Daniel. I called it the only way we're doing this, but that's what it was. Any request for financial help from Nancy had to be submitted via email, accompanied by a current budget and a payment update on the $2,000 she owed. Daniel struggled with it at first. He'd come into the kitchen while I was packing my lunch and say things like, Nancy mentioned her car is making a clicking sound, or, I think she's struggling with her utility bill this month. Did she send the email? I'd ask, not looking up from my sandwich. No. But she sounded really worried on the phone. Then she isn't worried enough to follow the rules, I'd say. He'd sigh, a long, heavy sound that was meant to signal his martyrdom, and walk back into the den. He didn't make any more secret deposits, mostly because I started checking the joint account every Friday afternoon. I didn't enjoy the surveillance, but I enjoyed the predictability more. The real test came in November. The Harrisburg weather had turned sharply, and a sudden freeze had left half the neighborhood dealing with burst pipes and dead batteries. Nancy called Daniel on a Tuesday evening, her voice frantic. Her alternator had gone, and she was stranded in the hospital parking lot. She needed $400 for the repair and a tow. Daniel came to me in the living room, his face pinched. She's stuck at work, Judy. It's freezing out. We can't just let her sit in the parking lot because she hasn't updated a spreadsheet. She has a credit card, I said, and she has the card is maxed. Please, just this once. It's an emergency. An emergency is a medical crisis. Daniel, a car repair is a maintenance issue. If she wants the money, she sends the email with the budget. I'll check it and approve the transfer within the hour. Daniel looked at me, and for a second, I thought he was going to argue. He opened his mouth, closed it, and then just shook his head. He went back to the phone and told Nancy that the money would be available as soon as the requested documents were sent. Nancy didn't send the email. She didn't send the budget. And she didn't provide a payment plan for the old debt. Instead, she found a way to get the car fixed. Likely through another bridge, from a friend or a high-interest loan, and she stopped answering Daniel's texts for 2 weeks. A few days later, Brenda from the third floor mentioned in passing that she'd seen a new post on Nancy's page. It wasn't a long indictment this time, just a short, vague status update about learning who you can actually count on when the world gets cold. I didn't feel the urge to call Nancy. I didn't feel the need to track down every person who had seen it, or to draft a corrective statement. I realized then that I had made a wrong assumption. I had believed that Nancy's original post was a tactical move, a tool she used to manipulate Daniel into giving her the security deposit. I thought that once the money was off the table, the narrative would disappear because it no longer had a practical purpose. I was wrong. For Nancy, the narrative wasn't a tool. It was an identity. She didn't just want the money. She wanted to be the person who was unfairly treated. The suffocating weight of conditional love wasn't a lie she told to get a check. It was the story she told herself to avoid the discomfort of being an adult with a budget. The post stayed up. The distorted version of me, the cold, calculating accountant, continued to exist in the digital ether of our extended family. But the post had lost its practical power. It could no longer be traded for cash. It could no longer be used to bypass the rules of my house. I couldn't control what Nancy wrote, and I couldn't force the rest of the family to see the ledger as I saw it. But I could control who had access to my bank account. By December, the tension in the house had settled into a quiet, workable distance. Daniel stopped trying to be the bridge, mostly because he realized there was nowhere for the bridge to go. He started spending more time in the den, not hiding, but actually working. I decided to change the layout of the guest room. For years, that room had been a sort of staging area for Nancy. A place where her half-packed suitcases lived for weeks and where her old clothes were piled in the corner. A permanent reminder that she was always halfway between needing us and wanting to leave. It was a room prepared for someone else's plan, a space that existed only to accommodate her instability. On a Saturday morning, while Daniel was out running errands, I hauled the remaining suitcases and the old piles of clothes out to the donation center. I scrubbed the baseboards and moved a heavy oak desk and a comfortable reading chair into the center of the room. I put up a lamp with a warm yellow glow and a shelf of books I'd been meaning to read for 3 years. When Daniel came home, he stood in the doorway and looked around. He didn't ask why I'd done it. He just saw that the room was finally being used for something actual. "It looks nice," he said. "It is nice," I replied. I sat down in the chair and opened a book, feeling the stillness of the house. The family drama hadn't been solved. There was no grand reconciliation, no perfect apology. But the logistics were finally mine. I had stopped trying to manage the story and started managing the boundary. And for the first time in a long time, the math actually added up.